We're live.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director here at the Division of Marine Fisheries, and you're attending a public hearing on some proposals for buoy line marking for 2022. Right, Jared? I'm looking at that that slide. The rules are being proposed this year, but they would go into effect for 2022. Tonight, the moderator is Jared Silver. You probably heard his voice before in some of these hearings and commission meetings. We also have Bob Glenn, who's going to present much of the actual proposals and the details. Also, protected species specialist Aaron Burke is participating as well. So this hearing is held under the provisions of Mass General 30A, as well as Chapter 130, 17A, and 104. We're taking comment and holding these public hearings on amendments to regulations that would affect buoy line marking in the commercial lobster trap fishery in 322 CMR 4 and 12. This is a rule that would be approved, or it would need to be approved by our 9-member Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, and the commissioner, as a normal rule, would be enacted. We're accepting public comment through next Thursday. There's another 9 days through May 20th. And we're asking folks to send comments to the marine.fish@mass.gov, or you can send it through the U.S. mail to me, to my attention. But we prefer you use the Marine Fish mailbox. That way, if you send it to an individual DMF staffer and it doesn't always, you're not guaranteed of getting into that large set of public hearing comments. I know personally I do get inundated with emails these days. Okay, rules of engagement. The purpose of the hearing is to afford you an opportunity to submit opinions, comments, data, or arguments on the specific proposals and how that amendment might be changed to minimize the impact on you. Comments on matters outside of the scope of the specific amendments will be accommodated at the end of the hearing if time permits. All members of the public will be muted through the presentation, and at the conclusion of the presentation, DMF will accept clarifying questions regarding the proposals. And then once all the questions are addressed, we'll invite the public comment on the various proposals. We don't usually allow the written chat function to be active during these hearings, because what we found is there was a lot of debate going back and forth between members, and especially if people are asking us to respond, or sometimes it's tough for us to even referee that. So we prefer to not allow that chat function during that time. When participating in the question or comment forum, use the raise hand function, and this creates a queue, and we will recognize and unmute the individuals. We'll call your name, and you can ask your questions or comments. We're asking you to keep it to 2 minutes, but if need be, I guess we could go longer, but it should work out fine. There's not a huge amount of attendees, and it's a single issue hearing. It's not necessary for you to provide verbal comment during this public hearing. You can use this hearing as you're listening to it live or in a recording on YouTube, and then submit comments later. And if you have any questions on it, you could email us, and we would resolve any of those questions that you might have. All written comments need to come in by May 20th, and written comments will be submitted to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission in advance of their June 3rd business meeting. And like I mentioned before, it's all going to be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. Next slide, please, Jared. Okay, so here's the overview. We're here tonight to talk about buoy line marking requirements for commercial lobster and crab trap gear fished by Massachusetts fishermen in state and federal waters. And we understand that this is coming right on the heels of another set of rules that we've enacted just a few months ago pertaining to the 1,700-pound breaking strength line and the use of contrivances and the closures. And I just want to say, thank you to any participating fishermen who are part of this hearing tonight for the cooperation we've gotten on the closures, and also on the rigging of rope for the 1,700-pound breaking strength standard. I know we've had a lot of staff out on the road and meeting with industry, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, not only from industry, but from staff who are being treated fairly well. And we really appreciate that. This is a difficult situation for you folks in the industry, and it's challenging for us as well. So I want to thank everybody for their ongoing cooperation. The purpose of this rule is to make Massachusetts gear definitively identifiable to allow for more precise management of the entanglement risk posed by commercial lobster and trap gear to protected species. And in other words, it ensures that Massachusetts gear is not misattributed to an entanglement occurring in another jurisdiction. We had an entangled whale this summer. I'm sorry, my bad. This winter during a closed time period, and it was clearly not a line that would be fished in Massachusetts state waters because of the diameter, as well as the length of the buoy line, as well as the composition. But getting even more definitive gear marking, and a lot of the states and the provinces up in Canada are moving to this, and I think it's going to allow a little bit more surgical management going forward. And this responds to two challenges that we have. First, the U.S. District Court has ordered DMF to obtain an incidental take permit for its fixed gear fisheries to cover potential takes of right whales and sea turtles. And secondly, the large whale take reduction plan rulemaking is ongoing, and that addresses management of the Northeast Mid-Atlantic lobster pot trap fishery at the federal level. And so Bob Glenn is going to speak next, and he's going to talk about the incidental take permit process that DMF is working on per court order, as well as some of the rationale for these proposals, because they are a little complicated, but we really do think it's worth it because of the need to definitively identify the gear. And then finally, back up one slide, Jared, the timeline. So tonight is May 11th. We're holding the hearing. May 20th concludes the public comment period. On May 28th, we're going to provide the commission with our recommendation for either proposed to go forward as written with modifications, or in some cases, after hearing, we may opt not to go forward with a rule. On June 3rd, the commission will vote. On June 25th, we expect to file final regulations. And then on February 1st of next year is when any of these rules would go into effect. So again, just a preview, but thank you for your continued cooperation and patience. And this is going to be another kind of pain in the butt for rank and file lobstermen, but we're doing our best to try to keep the fishery intact and to resolve some of the challenges that we have with some of the legal issues regarding these entanglements. So Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you for 8 or 9 slides on the details, and then you can hand it back to me when you're done.
Great, thanks, Dan. Thanks everybody for attending tonight. As Dan said, first what I'll do before I get into the proposed rules, I'm going to talk a little bit about our current status of our incidental take permit application. We're in the process of applying for this take permit application. The rulemaking that we've worked on this year, including, as Dan mentioned, the extension and addition of closed areas in Massachusetts, the adoption of 1,700-pound standard for weak rope or contrivances, and the other measures, maximum diameter buoy line, etc. All of those were regulations that we propose to kind of identify potential sources of risk to right whales in Massachusetts coastal waters, and then mitigate for them. And that's during an incidental take permit application. That's the primary goal, is to identify any sources of risk to protected species as part of the activity. In this case, the activity is commercial fishing with pot trap gear, to identify that risk and then mitigate for it. And that's what we've done with those regulations that we put into place so far. And it's what we seek to do with these current proposals for gear marking. Currently, Massachusetts is classified under MMPA as part of the Northeast Mid-Atlantic American lobster pot trap fishery. This includes federal lobster fisheries, as well as all the state fisheries from New York to Maine. One of the critical aspects of our incidental take permit application is for us to be able to distinguish ourselves on the NOAA list of fisheries as our own separate distinct fishery. That because because we can only mitigate for the risk that is attributed to our fishery, we can't mitigate for the risk of the entire fishery. So that's kind of a critical step for us to get our incidental take permit. And as I mentioned, we're in the process of requesting NIMS to list us separately. We've done that before. They've given us some feedback. And now for this 2022 list of fisheries, we're trying to put into place additional gear marking rules that take into consideration some of the comments we received back from National Marine Fisheries Service relative to truly making Massachusetts fishing gear distinct from all other jurisdictions. These proposed regulations, as well as the recently adopted fixed gear and buoy line modifications, are designed to provide additional conservation to right whales when compared to other jurisdictions to help achieve these requirements. Later this year, we will again be, as I indicated, replying to NOAA to ask them for the 2022 list of fisheries to list us separately. This is reviewed annually by NOAA, and we anticipate that they will publish the 22 list of fisheries sometime in September and October. Part of the timing of this, the reason for us getting these rules into place now, even though they won't go into effect until 2022, is demonstrating to NOAA that we've taken the sufficient steps to, in fact, distinguish our fishery from those in other jurisdictions. And hopefully this will pave the way for DMF to obtain or pave the way towards a successful ITP application for DMF. Next slide, please. Some of the recently, back in December of 2020, National Marine Fisheries Service published a series of proposed rules in there for the as part of the Atlantic large whale take reduction team plan. And these include some gear marking requirements. DMF anticipates that the federal rules will be promulgated during the late spring and early summer for implementation in 2022. We have currently been working to adopt state-specific buoy line rules for this list of fisheries application. We have also had ongoing conversations with National Marine Fisheries Service, as well as submitted comments to them regarding their proposed rules. And the table below, I'll go over it in more detail in the next slide, but those are the state by state and federal waters proposed gear marking measures that were in the NOAA proposed rule for this year. Next slide, please. In our comments, one of the primary concerns that we identified in the NOAA proposed rule was that the only difference between gear that was marked by federal fishermen versus gear for state waters fishermen was the addition of a 6-inch green mark in the top 2 fathoms of the buoy line. When you look at the figures on the left, you can see what the left buoy line would be the marking required in the federal waters portion, and the one on the right would be the one required for the state waters portion, according to the proposed federal rule. The problem with this is that in many cases, during an entanglement event, the surface system is lost, and all that is retrieved is a section of buoy line with or without some marks on it. And because the NIMS proposed rule only suggests marking one small green mark, we felt that there was a high likelihood in an entanglement event that green federal mark could be lost. And as a result, it could make very easily for us to be misattributed as having authorized the fishing gear that was in federal waters. So we submitted comments to NOAA on this. And as a result, we've come up with a kind of a different set of proposed gear marking regulations so that we can clearly distinguish the difference between gear that is set under the authorization of Massachusetts DMF versus those set in federal waters under the authorization of National Marine Fisheries Service. And so our proposed rule for Massachusetts for state waters for all lobster management areas, including 1, 2, and OCC, would be one solid 3-foot mark in the top 12 feet of buoy line, and then 2 marks to occur in the top half and 2 additional marks in the bottom half, with no more than 60 feet between red marks. So a total for state waters fisheries of 5 red marks. We also trying to take advantage of the recently promulgated weak insert rules or weak contrivance rules, and so that those red a sleeve that has either a red and white tracer in it, and or the red rope or candy cane rope that is being used as inserts in weak line, those also count as a mark. So we're trying to also take advantage of that to alleviate some of the burden to create additional marks every 60 feet. For the federal waters of LMA 1, 2, and OCC, we propose 1 3-foot solid red mark followed by a 1-foot solid green mark in the first 12 feet from the buoy, and then an additional at least 2 2-foot solid and non-solid marks in the body of the buoy line. Marks are to be comprised of 1 foot of red mark and 1 foot of green mark, and marks are to occur in the top third, middle third, and bottom. And so this is very different. This makes putting the federal green mark next to the state red mark in every case, so that in the event of an entanglement with only a section of buoy line is recovered, if it was from federal waters and from fishermen out of Massachusetts-based port, we would be able to see those green marks and distinguish that it was a federal waters gear. And then finally, we are basically just mirroring what National Marine Fisheries Service has proposed for federal waters of LMA 3, which is 1 3-foot solid mark followed by 1 foot solid green mark in the surface system within the first 12 feet, and then at least 3 2-foot solid or non-solid black marks in the body of the buoy line. Marks are to occur in the top third, middle third, and bottom third. I think the one distinguishing feature, I think, that in our proposed rule is the size of the marks. I'm not sure if we're asking for 2-foot marks. I'm not sure if National Marine Fisheries Service in their proposed rule for Area 3 is asking for 2-foot marks or not, but that's what we're proposing. Next slide. And so this figure is just kind of a visual comparison of the DMF versus the NOAA proposed rule. And so if you look at the far left, that's a DMF proposal for federal waters gear in LMA 1, 2, or OCC. And then the related federal proposed one would be the third one in that says Atlantic Large Whale TRP proposal for Mass Fisherman EEZ. And you can see the clear distinction here is that instead of only having 1 small green mark at the surface, we would have multiple green marks throughout. And then the primary difference between what is proposed in the federal plan for state waters versus what we're proposing is 2 different things. Is one, the size of the marks are going to be bigger. They're going to be 2 feet instead of 1 feet. And this is to address kind of some legacy issues. Red marks have been common in the lobster fishery throughout the Gulf of Maine, and throughout the Northeast rather for some time. And so there are a lot of existing 1-foot red marks out there, and we're just concerned from a legacy perspective about those persisting and those being misattributed to Massachusetts. And so because of that, moving forward, we're requiring all those marks to be no less than 2 feet in length to distinguish ourselves. The other distinguishing factor is the frequency of marks, and the reason for that is related to making Massachusetts rules more conservative and more unique than any of the other jurisdictions. So the other jurisdictions will not be required to mark with the same frequency that Massachusetts gear will have. And so this is an additional attempt by us to distinguish ourselves from the other fisheries that are currently within the Northeast lobster fishery. so that we can be listed separately. Next slide. So our next steps and challenges, as a DMF, will continue to work with NOAA Fisheries to ensure there is cohesion between the final state and federal rules. We've had a lot of conversations with our colleagues at NOAA. They've been productive, and we're hoping that when their rules are finalized and come out, that they'll reflect a lot of the comments that we've given to them relative to marking in federal waters. We'll propose our final recommendations to our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission for review at the June 3rd business meeting. And if approved by the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, DMF will file final regulations during the summer of 2021 for implementation on February 1st of 2022. And then later this year, we're hoping that those changes in these regulations will be sufficient to convince NOAA that we've made the appropriate distinctions in our fishery to be listed separately. There are challenges here. We understand that this is an additional burden on the fishing industry. It's a lot more marking, and it's an additional burden for those who are dual state federal permit holders, because of the requirements for state gear are going to be different from federal gear. And this is an extra burden on them, but unfortunately, we just don't see any way around it. Given what was put forth in the NOAA draft environmental impact statement, they made it fairly clear that each fishery within U.S. waters is going to be responsible for their own takes. And along those lines, relative to the incidental take permit, Massachusetts will be responsible for our own takes. And so it's very, very important for us to be able to really distinguish or identify where takes are occurring. And so we can't afford to have any takes that happen or any entanglements that happen in federal waters be attributed to Massachusetts, because that would jeopardize the continuation of our incidental take permit if that would be the case. And so DMF is open to work with the industry to develop and publicize best practices for compliance. This may include inserting and removing green traces and moving gear in and out of the EEZ. But again, we're willing to work with fishermen. We're also willing to possibly help with additional developing and helping with materials for additional ways to mark to comply with these new gear marking rules. And with that, I will hand it over to Dan.
Hey, thanks, Bob. So at this point, Jared is going to recognize members of the public for clarifying questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question for Bob or for me on these proposals. Go ahead, Jared. You can take them one at a time.
Mike Sprague, you recognize, you can unmute yourself. Mike Sprague, you can unmute yourself. Mike, I'm going to come back to you. Steve Boudreau, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I have a question. So we've closed the northern waters from, basically Cape Cod all the way to the New Hampshire line. But Area 2 has been left open. Now, a lot of us during this time have been following, the right whale maps, the interactive maps, and there's been quite a big population on the federal state line down there. Is there any markings to identify the open Area 2 versus the closed northern waters? So the entire state isn't getting pinned with something if God forbid a whale were to be entangled down there?
So there's nothing specific in the gear market regulations that will differentiate between lobster management areas. What they'll do is they'll differentiate by state, and they'll differentiate by whether or not the gear was set in federal or state waters. And so
Right,
in that particular instance, gear inside the state water side of Area 2 would only have red marks, and gear in the federal water side of Area 2 would have both green and red marks.
Right, but don't you think that's an awfully big risk when you're asking the rest of the fleet to go through all these hurdles? I mean, I honestly, I've been fishing for 25 years, and I've gone through everything that you guys have thrown at us, and all it's gotten us is a closed area, but you left Area 2 open. And as far as I'm concerned, and I think any other fisherman would be concerned, that's a problem.
So, yeah, no, I understand your concern, Stephen. So first thing I'll say is we don't have any jurisdiction in the federal waters portion of Area 2 where high densities of right whales are. We left the state waters portion of Area 2 open precisely because we've never had any detections of right whales in the state waters portion of Area 2, areas like Buzzards Bay, Vineyard Sound, and Nantucket Sound. There's those definitely whales in the federal portion of Area 2, but we don't have jurisdiction to extend closure there. I know that in the proposed rule, the National Marine Fisheries Service does have several options for closures that will close large portions of Area 2 if they go forward. But that, we'll find out what the federal closures down there are going to be, hopefully in the next couple of months.
Okay. All right. So Area 2 just does whatever they want, right? And the rest of us gotta.
No, Area 2 has to do all the same things except Buzzards Bay and Nantucket Sound wasn't closed to lobster fishing this winter because there aren't any whales there. Again, the federal portion of it, we don't have jurisdiction over. So I have no authority to close federal waters to lobster fishing.
No, I'm not talking federal. I'm talking the state water side of it. I'm talking a way to identify Area 2 state waters. God forbid something ever happens, so the rest of the state that's been shut down isn't getting into trouble for it.
Steve, may I interject? That sounds like a comment that you might want to make later to see a specific gear marking scheme for the state waters portion of LMA 2. So, Babe, may I suggest that if you are to make a comment, you include that in there?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you, Steve. Did you have any other follow-up questions?
No,
Okay.
Not at this time.
Jared, who's next?
Tom McShane.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Dan and Bob. So as I understand what Bob was explaining, the purpose of this is solely about identifying responsibility for the taking of whales, not about avoidance of the taking. And isn't that an awful waste of money since it's not going to cost, since it's going to cost a lot of money, and yet it's not going to save the whales since the rope will still be there?
Yeah, Tom, that's a rhetorical question. And if you'd like to make that comment under the comment section later, I'd welcome you to do that.
Okay. Is there any way of knowing how many people are on so I know how long I'm going to be waiting?
There are 33 attendees at this hearing this evening.
Great. Thank you.
Leah Baumwell, you're recognized. Leah, you have to unmute your phone.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Oh, thanks for the presentation. I guess I just have a question, sort of building off the last two speakers. So, obviously, like the gear marking of the rope will actually reduce entanglements with animals. So so it's just to identify who's responsible. And does that mean that there'll be some kind of work with enforcement? I mean, to hold people responsible? I mean, I guess I'm asking, like, what's the reason for identifying the fishery or the fishermen?
Yeah, the large whale take reduction team meets very frequently now, but it used to meet periodically, like every couple of years. And the data that they would study would be the entanglement records and the attribution of the sources of the entangling lines. We all know that right whales are capable of carrying rope over long distances and over long periods of time. And where you see an entangled whale is almost never where the whale has been entangled. I had mentioned that whale earlier. I believe the name was a cottontail, and Bob, you can correct me, but there was a whale that was seen in Cape Cod Bay in the middle of our closure with huge, very thick line, very long piece of line. Clearly not something that would be fished in Massachusetts state waters, but that's where the entanglement was cited. A proposal like this and others that Canada and NIMS is developing would allow any gear that was taken off the animal to be attributed to the geographic region. I mean, I can tell you that in my opinion, a 300-foot piece of 5/8 inch rope is not something Massachusetts fishes. I can say that with confidence, but I don't have evidence. But by having this extra gear marking, it would allow us to further eliminate the potential attribution of that gear to Massachusetts waters. Just as the proposal that we enacted last winter, where we prohibited any rope thicker than 3/8 inch diameter in state waters, would also contribute to that. So if an animal showed up, with line thicker than 3/8 inch, we're confident that it wasn't Massachusetts line. So yes, it's simply to attribute that. And then what would happen in that situation? The large whale take reduction team and working with the managers, might make new regulations that would be regionally specific.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, thank you. I guess my second question is the comments that you're looking for just, related to this buoy line marking proposal specifically, or are you, taking, and we've already submitted, I guess, our comments to the original proposal. So this is just comments to the amendment?
Yeah.
Comments on the state proposal described on this slide.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for folks to comment on that. We're most, especially interested in the comments from the stakeholders, like the commercial fishermen, who are going to have to, if enacted, are going to have to comply with these rules and the practicality of them. As Bob mentioned, we've had a lot of success working with the commercial fishermen to make some of these other rules, livable, such as the contrivances and the splices, things like that, to achieve the 1,700-pound weak rope standard. And we're anticipating working closely with the industry to make sure that there's practical ways to mark this gear, and that the frequency of marking and the length of the marks are reasonable and doable. So that's what we're most interested in tonight.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Leah. Beth Cassoni, you can unmute yourself. You're recognized.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Bob and Dan. I have a question, and it keeps coming up, and the red rope and the candy cane rope, is the state going to come out with a marking scheme for that as well? Because a lot of the guys have been putting they're using the full vertical line red. So I don't see any red rope with white markings on them. So that's a concern.
Bob?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Beth. Yes, and so as part of the full proposal that we put out, it includes specifics in the advent of using either the red weak rope or the candy cane rope. Those markings that'll be required will be in the color white. I know at one point we had hoped that just using the red rope would be sufficient as a marking tool, or the candy cane rope as a marking tool. The problem is that rope is commercially available to fishermen from any state. So there is the potential next year, when the 1,700-pound rule goes into effect for all jurisdictions, there's a potential for fully formed red rope or fully formed candy cane rope to be fished in other states. So because of that, we need to make those marks white on the red rope to distinguish it.
Okay, and then on the dual permit holders, the green markings will not be allowed in state waters, correct?
Correct.
So is there going to be a menu of acceptable green markings, whether it's a streamer, a zip tie? I know I was talking to some fishermen today, and they're dual permit holders, and the thought of having two sets of end lines just causes more stress.
Understood. Yeah, and so we'll be happy to work with the fishing industry to develop kind of like we have with the weak contrivances, to develop a series of materials and acceptable materials and methods to mark the gear to comply with the rules. We're anything that's readily identifiable, easy to work with, and has some lasting power, some sustainability out in the water, would be willing to entertain, and we're happy to work with them to develop those.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mark Cabana, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just got a couple questions. First, I think it was Bob's, or I think it was your point earlier, about the rope that's found on the whales and the markings that are or are not in the rope when they're found. Is there any sort of protocol for releasing that information? Because as the news publishes these whales with rope on them, and then it's found that it's rope, and again, you can't definitively say that whose it was, but you can definitively say that it wasn't where it wasn't. And is there any protocol for releasing that information?
Well, let me make a comment, and then Bob can give you the full answer. But they say that news is the first draft of history. And so when a reporter gets information about an entanglement that was detected yesterday, that rope hasn't been typically examined by the experts to determine its origin. Sometimes that takes, a matter of days or weeks, well after that entanglement is no longer in the news. But the whole purpose of this is to be able to see the line, or in some cases when the line has been taken off the whale, to definitively study that line and have evidence about where it came from. And in the case of the whale I just mentioned, the 300-foot piece of 5/8 line, there's plenty of opportunity to study that. So in a case like that, this kind of a gear marking scheme could really help to decipher where the origin. And Bob, maybe you want to make a more general comment about, or a specific comment about, how that information is shared with the team and with the public.
Yeah, so anytime there's gear taken off any whale, that gear is taken into possession by National Marine Fisheries Service, and they store it in a large barn in Narragansett. Their gear folks then do an investigation and kind of look at the characteristics. And obviously, if there's a buoy line on it with a permit number, it's pretty easy to identify the gear. But in most cases, it's just a length of line. And so they go and look at different characteristics, or if any type of marking is on there. In the case that Dan just mentioned about cottontail, that whale was first spotted entangled off the coast of Massachusetts in 300 feet of 5/8 inch line. Just recently, National Marine Fisheries Service completed its investigation of that rope and have determined, based on the line characteristics, that it is consistent with gear fished in the Canadian snow crab fishery. And so they just released that information recently. like Dan said, it's difficult because oftentimes we don't get an answer about what the gear is until, it could be 6 months or in this case, it was a little quicker with Cottontail, but in many cases, 6 months or even a year before the results of the gear are published and made available. So it is, it is difficult to get that out in a timely fashion.
All right, that makes sense. And I mean, but I understand, that these guys have been marking their gear for quite some time. And, it's some of the gear marking is rather cumbersome. And, for these guys who have marked their gear for however many years now to go through that time and make that effort and then have it basically not be acknowledged that there are 3 red marks in everybody's end lines. But that's, that's for down the road. So my other question is basically, how is it going to help distinguish the marking if there's a 2-foot red marking in an end line, let's say, or a 60-foot portion of an end line, which sounds like about the longest that it could, or the shortest it could be. If there's a 2-foot red mark in that, why does it matter if there's 1 or 2 2-foot red marks? Isn't one red mark, 1 2-foot or greater red mark enough to distinguish that's Massachusetts lobster gear?
Bob, you're muted.
My apologies. Sorry about that. Now, the answer to your question is so yes, 1 2-foot red mark would be sufficient to look at a piece of gear and say that belongs to Massachusetts. The problem is that in entanglement cases, we often only get fragments of rope back. So the higher the frequency with which you mark the gear, the higher the likelihood that marking will be retained during an entanglement event, and that'll be able to be identified. And so what Massachusetts is doing in this case is we're distinguishing ourselves, and we're saying we're confident that because of the rules we have in place, where we close our entire fishery when the whales are here, that when we are fishing with buoy lines, our gear is so well marked that if it does get entangled on a whale, it's going to be easily distinguishable as Massachusetts, and we'll take responsibility for it and face the music relative to the incidental take permit with NIMS.
All right, thank you. I'll save the rest for my comment. Thank you.
Eric Lorenzen?
Yeah,
Hi.
Eric.
I got a question on the dual marking for federal area and state area. So from my understanding, I have to take a foot of red off to put a foot of green on when I cross the line. But could I just add a foot of green next to or over the 2-foot red and still be compliant?
Muted, Bob.
Sorry, that's a good question, Eric. I would maybe defer to Jared, and Dan would have to do a little bit of thinking about it. But at least at first cut, I would say that provided that the line had at least a 2-foot, the marks were at least 2 foot in length and had at least 1 foot of green and 1 foot of red, you'd be compliant with the regulation, would be my interpretation. But
Bob, I concur with that.
Yeah, that's just the kind of feedback we hope to get tonight. You guys listen to these proposals and you think ways through that we can do it more practically. That's a good comment. Oh, that's a good question. It sounds like it's coming as a comment, but Eric, thanks for that.
Okay.
All right, Dan, at this time, I'm not seeing any further questions. Do we want to proceed to comments?
Yeah, let's go to comments. And if possible, could we allow the commercial lobster and crab pot fishermen to sort of have first dibs on some of these comments, like take comments from them first? I know there may be comments that folks want to make from the conservation community, or if we could not pepper them in the middle of the hearing. I'd like to just hear first from those who fish and want to make sort of practical comments for us, consistent with the comments that Eric made in that vein, where we could maybe ponder improving the regulation. Thanks.
Mark Bona, you're recognized.
Yeah, just before I get all sidetracked, I was just gonna say my comment is gonna be basically between the buoy, the contrivance, and the ground line. It seems like, it's gonna be basically impossible for any length of rope shorter than 60 feet to be found. And as long as there's a 2-foot or greater red mark in each of those segments, I feel like that should be enough to identify our rope, up to the 4 that you guys were, suggesting or proposing, I should say. So that's all.
Thank you, Mark. Not seeing any further comments from fishermen.
Dan, you're muted now.
So I guess we can just ask Eric. We're in the comment section. I guess Eric Lorenz's comment could just be repeated at this phase of the hearing. Eric, you want to repeat that? Or did he drop off?
No, he's here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from what I'm looking at and I understand is as soon as I go into federal waters, I have to take a foot of red off and then replace it with green. But I was wondering if we could just leave the 2-foot and then put a green in with it. So I don't have to change the entire buoy line. I can just use a green 1-foot-long zip tie and zip it over the red mark. And then as I cross back and forth, just kind of take the zip tie off.
Okay.
Thank you, Art. Steve Boudreau, did you want to speak to a separate marking system for LMA2 should that area remain open in state waters during the winter? Steve, you're recognized.
Yeah, I think it's something that should be looked at. Obviously, you guys know better than I do. I truly feel that it's something that should be looked into, just as a way to protect the fleet as a whole. As I said before, the northern portion of the fleet has, we have a closed area, so we're doing our part to protect the whales. Guys aren't happy about it, but they're doing it. All that I'm asking is maybe, look into it, think about it, and see if it's something that maybe should be done, because that portion of Mass State Waters does remain open, and whales have tails and they move back and forth as we've all seen and know. So I'm just asking that you take it under advisory and look into it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you.
And I think your hand raised, Dan. So would you like to move to comments from other individuals?
Yeah, sure. Lobsterman, last chance if you want to speak to the practicality of these or have any other suggestions. If not, please feel free to write to us, reach out to Bob and his team, or drop us an email if there's any constructive comments you want to make on this. We really appreciate it.
Comments are now open to the remainder of the public. If you have a comment, please raise your hand. All right, I'm not just, CT Harry, recognized.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can.
Fantastic. Good evening. I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is CT Harry, and I'm the Marine Campaigner for IFAW. I'd like to begin, obviously, by thanking Dan, Bob, Aaron, and the rest of Division of Marine Fisheries staff for holding this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to provide some comment tonight. While I truly appreciate DMF's acknowledgement that the appropriate gear marking is important to better identify state permitted gear when right whale and other large whale and marine turtle entanglements occur, gear marking by itself does not reduce the risk of entanglement. Only by removing the vertical buoy rope from the water column will we prevent right whales from getting entangled. Gear marking that uses reduced breaking strength rope, so-called weak rope and or weak links, also do not protect whales from deadly entanglements, as weak rope and weak links are an interim solution at best. It will not help whales long term. As proposed by DMF, new gear marking requirements will not allow access into low density whale areas within closures, nor will they protect our fishing industry from new or expanded closures. The only long-term solution to save the species is to remove the deadly vertical rope from the water column. The way to do this is to increase incentives and insistence for fishermen to transition to ropeless fishing. We should not ask fishermen to make a pit stop on the road to ropeless, but instead focus on a long-term solution. More needs to be done, and fishers need a streamlined permitting process that allows them to thrive while ensuring the survival of the species. We need to harness the knowledge and ingenuity of fishermen to be part of this process, as this technology will keep fishermen on the water and save right whales. My colleagues at IFAW and our partners, including leaders in the fishing community, are resolved that the right whale cannot go extinct on our watch. State regulation should reflect that same resolve. Thank you again for this opportunity to comment, and we'll be providing written comments by the May 20th deadline.
Thank you.
Regina Sylvia? Regina, are you there? Regina, I'll come back to you. Shelby McManus?
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Dan, Bob, and Jared, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Shelby McManus. I am a college student here in Boston. I've lived here for the past 3 years, but I've also grown up in coastal Rhode Island. And living on the East Coast, I've always had a very deep respect for the fishing industry, one that employs so many of my friends and family. And I also have a deep passion for marine life. We're so fortunate to live in an area of the country with an abundant coast and a swath of natural resources and aquatic life. But tonight, I would like to touch on the importance of protecting our most vulnerable resident, our state marine mammal, the North Atlantic right whale. And I believe that these regulations can go even further. At least 160 right whales have been spotted in Cape Cod Bay in just 1 week in April. And throughout the season, hundreds of a population of under 400 navigate our waters very close to the shore. While gear markings are so important in understanding where and how these whales are being entangled, we're just not considering ropeless fishing gear as a viable option in protecting this species from entanglements to begin with. Even with protections such as weak rope and weak links in place, young whales who don't meet the breaking strength requirement are put in harm's way. I want to know why DMF is excluding calves and juveniles in their weak link parameters due to their weight, and how long can a calf carry gear if entangled? Of the 10 right whale calves that are known to exist, 3 of them were spotted off the coast of Massachusetts in April. The right whale moms and calves that navigate our shores are key to sustaining the population and ensuring that right whales do not go extinct. Outside of mortality events, the trauma that these whales face from entanglements, both physically and psychologically, prevents the species from thriving in our waters and from repopulating enough to survive in the future. I really do urge the Department of Marine Fisheries to include a pilot program for ropeless fishing gear in their regulations and to protect our state marine mammal and ensure that Massachusetts is not responsible for the extinction of a mammal so well loved by the residents of this state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelby. Tom McShane?
Hi, thanks again, Dan and Bob and Jared. As I mentioned earlier during my question, obviously my concern is that I don't believe this will prevent any takes, and yet it will cost our lobstermen money and aggravation, which seems to be a lose-lose situation. I wish the Commonwealth would instead spend their money and their effort on ropeless gear, which could save the species and allow lobstermen to avoid closure areas, which seems to be a win-win situation. And So I just want to make sure that you know where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. Regina, I'm coming back to you right now. You're recognized. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can now, yes. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. My name is Regina Asmita Silvia. I'm with Whale and Dolphin Conservation. I'm also a very long-term member of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team. And I first want to thank DMF for always leading in a way that does balance the needs of the fisheries with the recovery of right whales. And improved gear marking has been a significant point of discussion at the TRT for many, many years. And it's increasingly important, I think, is the U.S. For U.S. fisheries as right whales are shifting habitats, including spending more time in Canadian waters. I just want to clarify that the intent of the gear marking is never to place blame, but it's to eliminate further burdens on fisheries which don't pose high risk. So having said that, the ideal gear marking frequency based on the amount of gear that's typically taken off whales is a mark every 40 feet. We do appreciate that that's an additional burden that is placed on the industry, but also appreciate that this information can fully help reduce further regulatory measures that on fisheries which don't present high risk. So thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Thank you, Regina. Dan, that is all for comments.
All right, well, folks, thank you for attending tonight and giving us some great feedback. Please take advantage of the opportunity to write to us to that DMF email address, themarine.fish@mass.gov. And we will include all of your comments. We'll consider them all, and we'll also forward them all to our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, who will be voting on this at their meeting. I see one last hand up, Jared, and Emily Norton.
Emily, you're recognized.
Hi, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I was a little bit late, but I just wanted to offer a very quick comment. Again, my name is Emily Norton, a city councilor in Newton and a frequent visitor to Cape Cod and appreciator of all of our native wildlife here in Massachusetts, but particularly the iconic right whale. And it just seems like the Division of Marine Fisheries has taken some steps to protect the right whale, but that the ropeless technology would get the job done. And so I very much encourage you to go farther than you've gone and take the necessary steps that IFA and others are recommending in terms of actually protecting this species, which is at the brink of extinction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, folks, thank you for attending. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel. If you want to go back and see, especially Bob's technical presentation, I recommend that. So thank you for attending and have a great night, everyone.